Hey everybody, this is Zachary Jeans. Let's keep walking through the Bible. So today is day 435. That's right, episode 435. We are in First Kings and we're looking at the life of Elijah as First Kings details it. Today we're going to be introduced to Jezebel in detail. I had misspoke yesterday that she was with Ahab at the get together with all the prophets of Baal and Asheroth. She was not. She was back in at the house in Samaria. So in Jezreel specifically. So that'll show up here today in today's text. But she is pretty vicious, very vindictive, and she is going to throw down the gauntlet to Elijah the prophet. He's going to go through some depression and anxiety and all the things that you and I feel. Well, hi Thule. Yeah, we got a new kitty in the house. Well, not literally in the house, but in the shot. There we go. All right. Can you say hi, Thule? No, she's not much of a talker. But she is sweet. She is a barn cat that came to this house from the previous owner with her sister April. And April is a tuxedo. Got a little bit of white and black and really sweet. Anyway, they sleep together on this chair that I'm sitting in at night. And it's just the sweetest thing to see them, sort of nuzzle each other, and one will lay on top of the other one and vice versa throughout the evening. And pretty great cats. So we're really happy to have acquired them in our move. All right, girl. I'm gonna set you down. All right, there you go. Okay, so anyway, thank you so much. Appreciate your love, appreciate your likes. Hitting that little, as a guy I watch, Joe Rambo says, the positive affirmation button. Appreciate when you reshare. This can bless anyone. Send them the link to a private message. It's great. Nobody, if they're a little freaked out about having Jesus stuff, publicly sent to them, send it to them in a text message, and you can clip things out on YouTube. So that's always an option as well. For those of you who want to, please pray. Bless what I'm doing here. Pray that the word goes out and accomplishes the work that it's meant to do. God promises it will, and it won't return void. And that's an easy prayer to pray because God promises that it'll happen. And for those that want to support what I'm doing, there are a few people who do support me financially, and I appreciate each one of them. You can go to ko-fi, so play on the word coffee, ko-fi.com / and then my name, Zachary Jeans. So that link is in YouTube, in the description, and in Rumble and what have you. So thank you so much. Why don't we stop? Why don't we pray? And we'll get into our text. We'll be in 1 Kings chapter 18. Lord, I love you. God, thanks for your word. God, I do pray, God, that your word would go out right now and not return void. It'll accomplish all the work it's meant to do. God, I pray that for these that are taking time to get in your word. And God, I pray that, Lord, for even my own heart as I'm teaching. And Lord, I just lay all this at your feet. Your glory, Jesus, not mine. Amen. All right. Okay. So again, 1 Kings, did I say 18? Chapter 19. Chapter 19. Okay, so chapter 18, he finishes up, dealing with the prophets, had them all executed. And Ahab left and went and told Jezebel. So verse 1, chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. I mean, can you even imagine that? A king of the tribes of Israel fleeing a horrific scene because he saw the power and the glory of God coming through the person of Elijah, and the horrific slaughter of all these religious prophets, which he and his wife and the kingdoms had been worshiping alongside and under. And their power was zilch, nothing. And no power to ignite the sacrifice. It did not happen. And then Elijah comes along, and by the power of God, not only lights that sacrifice on fire, but does so when it's soaked, absolutely soaked with water. The horror to which Ahab observed, and those around him, that this happened, I mean, that's just horrifying, right? To see that your belief system didn't have any authority or power, and then to see that your opposition, the thing that that Israel used to worship and is largely discredited and denied, that's the Lord of heaven and earth, Yahweh, shows up through his prophet Elijah. And then enacts justice on all of those religious leaders that had led Israel astray. And it was bloody and awful and horrific. And it's not like it was quiet and clean at all. And Elijah either personally walked one by one by one by one, all the way down the line, as it were, the 950 priests and what have you of Ashtaroth and of Baal, and personally cut their throat. People didn't just die quietly. The shrieks, the sound of people trying to, as they're bleeding out on the ground. It was a horrific scene. Ahab leaves, and he goes and he tells Jezebel, his wife, all that Elijah had done, how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Subtle, to the point. No great army going down there after Elijah. She just sends a word and a vow in that word. So it's kind of scary to get that kind of a letter, to get that kind of a message. It's not an expected response like, hey, here's Jezebel and Ahab showing up with all the armies of Israel to surround Elijah and his handful of supporters that were there and saw the power of God. Well, no, because Israel had gathered en masse there. It's probably not the right move, because it's not just a small group of supporters. Okay, well, what does she do? She whispers into his ear. She speaks something to him that hits him to his core. She threatens his life, and does so in such a way that Elijah, it says in verse 3, then he was afraid. And he rose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. How can Elijah be afraid? He was just filled with God's authority and power in such a way that he stood down, 950 prophets in front of, a huge, huge crowd who had gathered to watch this like competition, this display of authority and power between the prophets of Baal, Ashtaroth, and him and Yahweh. He'd stood against the king and his soldiers were there. But this one word, this threat, Elijah was afraid. And how? We're all mortal. We have immortal souls in mortal vessels, in mortal flesh. And life is precious, and we protect it. We protect our own. And when it's threatened in such a way by a force that you recognize has the ability to harm you, it creates within you fear. Now, this might be a threat around a job. It could be a threat not around your life. It could be something like a threat around a business deal, or, a threat around your general happiness, when it comes to family get-togethers, so-and-so can't come to this family get-together, or whatever. And so these are very minor ways in which our life is threatened. But in this case, Jezebel's making the threat like, I'm going to hunt you down and I'm going to kill you. And Elijah is afraid. So he rose and he ran for his life. Now, is this right or wrong? I don't know. Paul at times stands his ground. And there are times when Paul flees in a basket. There are times when, Peter is like boldly proclaiming this and then stepping out of the jail at night, and then back in the temple the next day and then stepping out in another situation. There are times when the apostles stuck around Jerusalem, and there's a time when they left. They fled Jerusalem through the persecution and then took the gospel to all other places. When is it okay to stay, or should I go, Well, I don't know what's right or wrong here. I think we get a sense from the Lord as we read this passage that the Lord is reminding him who he is in God, who God is to him. So let's continue. Okay. Then he was afraid, and he rose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I'm no better than my fathers. And he lay down, and he slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him. And he said to him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, and there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank, and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came a second time, and he touched him, and he said, Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank. And he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, to the Mount of God. Wow. Elijah was afraid, and once he had left his servant, he went away out into the wilderness. And much like much like others before him, he was out there and he's ready to die. You know, I think of Ishmael's mom. You know, she goes out, she'd been run out by Sarah, you know, Abraham's wife, and with her son. And she went out there and she was just, you know, weeping and ready to die, you know, completely cast out into the wilderness with her son. No chance. Angel Lord asked her why she was crying, and you know, they have a conversation, and essentially he promises that she's gonna be all right, the kid's gonna be okay, and he'll become a number of kingdoms. You know, and Moses out in the wilderness, many times in his life, you know, you think of the times, you know, where he was like, God, just kill me, you know, this nation, you know, it's too much for me. The burden of leadership, or, you know, there's times when he was up on the mountain, he's up there 40 days, 40 nights, the mountain of God where Elijah tries to go, right? And although Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai, different places, but a mount of God, right? And Moses up there 40 days, 40 nights, comes down and then sees that the people have followed after Aaron and their golden calves, and they're having an orgy and a party and rejecting God. And how utterly gutting that must have been. And then he goes up for another 40 nights and days and nights. Elijah, who's felt the highest of highs with God, is now feeling the lowest of lows. You know, I've known people, I've experienced some of this in my own life. But I think of a guy that I knew in ministry briefly, a couple different points. Somebody I've kind of known him, known some of his family, a little bit just distantly. And this guy was so on fire for the Lord, so bold for the Lord, got saved out of such drug addiction and brokenness, and then went on to, you know, share the Lord with tens of thousands of people all over the world. You know, prayed for miracles, saw miracles happen, was as authentic as you could get. And this guy also had lows of lows. Doubted his faith, you know, from all accounts, you know, completely failed 2 marriages, you know, in terms of just his support and his leadership of those families. Wonderful guy, had horrible seasons of life, despaired of life, stepped out in front of a truck, was in a coma. God brought him back, and then he spent the last 5 years of his life really living it out again for the Lord. Went to his celebration of life, and as people recounted all these things, he had died. Nobody knows exactly what it was, probably an aneurysm or something, lingering effect possibly from the other accident. Hope it wasn't drug, you know, related. He struggled with this stuff, but this is also a guy that would march into, you know, other religious villages in Africa or India or wherever and share the Jesus film, and people would shout him down, and he would proclaim God's love and lead worship, and people would just get saved. Hundreds of people would get saved. It's the kind of guy that would, you know, share the gospel in the jungles of the Amazon, going up rivers that even the local tribes were like, you don't want to go down that river. There's some people back there that aren't even like, they won't even talk to us, that we'll just die, you know, that sort of thing. He was willing to go to these places. And I think of him, his highs and his lows. So how do you feel about people like that in your life? How do you feel about yourself when you've experienced God's power and his just incredible love and seeing him work in your life, other people's lives, through your life, and then you feel like you get threatened by a situation or a person, and then you just feel gutted? Elijah stood down 950 prophets or priests, right, of Baal and Ashtoreth. Personally oversaw or committed the execution and judgment of those people. Stood down King Ahab in front of all of the assembled tribes of Israel that were willing to come and watch this event. In the power and might of God, watch the fire of God come down out of heaven and burn the offering. All of it. Saw it all. And it's not all that Elijah saw and did in his life. He did and saw a whole bunch more, right? And here he is getting a threat from Jezebel. And he flees. He tells his servant, we're done. You stay here. Going on out there. And he goes out there and he's ready to die. Just God take me. I'm done. What does God do? I think God does this for any of us. Having distant observed this one person's life I'm talking about, and others, even in the midst of our failures and doubts, in the depth of our just aching depression, God will come along and he'll just give you a little bit of what you need. A lot of times he will not just come in and just shout down from heaven, or, take all this energy of people and circumstance and, lift you up. A lot of times he's just like, hey, here's some water. Here's a little bit of bread. Here's a saltine cracker or two, and here's some 7-Up. Let's get your strength back. Let's get you to base. And I think a lot about that when it comes to the times when I have a chance to minister to somebody who's feeling low, or even dealing with my own heart when I'm feeling low. Giving myself permission to be okay, to come back to that base little level, just bring it back to a place if something's making me sad or down, or, if somebody around me is just like, they're freaking out, just get them. You don't have to bring them to these heights of spiritual reality. Just help them get to a firm foundation of stuff. And sometimes that's just a cold cup of water, some 7-Up, a drink of something, and some saltine crackers. Well, Elijah takes that after a couple days of that sort of ministry of sleeping it off, and he rises and he goes on a 40-night day and night journey to Horeb, the Mount of God. And he goes to the cave, comes to a cave, and he lives in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I, only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. What are you doing here? Right? God, I have done it all, as much as I think I can in your name. And I've survived to this point, and I'm looking around and I don't see anybody else. What are you doing here, Elijah? The Lord says, go out, stand on the mount before the Lord. So he comes out of the cave and he stands out there. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains, broke in pieces rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind and earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. This Bible mentions that it can also be translated as a thin silence. Does God speak to us? Do we get voice memos from God? I saw, a lot of Catholics struggle with this. Some mainline denominations don't believe God will speak to our hearts. Some of my evangelical brothers and sisters believe that it's only the Bible, which God speaks through the Bible, 100%. But I do believe God's Spirit lives within us. That's what the Bible teaches us. And if God's Spirit is living and active and real, God is going to guide and direct and speak to us. And how does God speak to us? Well, it's that thin silence, that notable whisper of the Lord. Now, what's scary is there's a lot of technology out there. There's actually technology been developed that deals with casting audible voices into people's heads through, it's sort of that technology with the whole bone vibration thing with the ear that they can help people hear better with. There are different headphones that do that. But this can be projected, and they call it the voice of God, and it's like a weapon that's used. So you got to be careful about discerning. Is that the Lord? Not just from that particular thing, but like from anything, right? You got to go, is that me? Is that a thought pattern from something else, a TV show or a podcast, or, is that a course of thinking that is not my voice? But if you know the Lord and you talk to the Lord enough, you'll realize that thin silence, that still small voice of the Lord. In this case, there is a display of authority and power that goes before the Lord. And much like, as I said, when you try to lift somebody up out of a dark, hard place, all the big stuff, let's take you to a party, or let's take you to a worship gathering. Let's take you to a big church thing. Let's get a bunch of people to lay hands on you. Let's, I'm trying to think of, well-meaning people wanting to do big things to help somebody in a very broken place, right? And the Lord gives them a cup of water and gives them some bread. And then he goes, and this guy, he goes to the cave, and he's on the mountain, and he's there, and the Lord speaks to him. He's like, come on out. What are you doing here? And it's not the fire, and it's not the wind, it's not the earthquake. It's that thin silence, that still small voice. And Elijah heard it. He wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah says again, I walk the walk, I talk the talk. Nobody else is left, basically. The Lord says to him, go, return your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael, to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be the king over Israel. So he's going to anoint Hazael to be king over Syria and Nimshi to be king over Israel. Okay. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. 7,000. You aren't alone, Elijah. There's 7,000 at least, but 7,000 that have not forsaken the Lord. Well, I think we'll leave the calling of Elijah till tomorrow. It's a heavy passage because you see what's a better way to put this? So in the context of sharing the story about the guy I was talking about, and talking about how you can see this in this powerful man of God, Elijah, you see it I've seen it in the lives of those who have walked the walk and talked the talk, on fire for Jesus. I've seen them. Great heights and deep lows. Too many of them. And have bailed on the Lord in those dark times. And I think that they're still saved. I think that the work that they did for the Lord was received and rewarded. And I think that their errors of doubt of the Lord get their own reward too, and they'll have a talking to the Lord when they're there. Like, that's going to be a very uncomfortable conversation. Yet, through it all, his love for them, wanting to come alongside them in their lowest moments and offer them the proverbial saltine crackers and, some Sprite, and to speak gently to them truth. That's how God works. And even the strongest and most faithful of us, or even those highest of highs in our own lives, we will see our own frailty, our own mortality, our own fear. And it's okay to sleep it off a little bit and to have some just getting back to basics with the Lord and listening to him. Because the Lord isn't in just the big stuff. The fire coming down of heaven and burning up the offering and the displays of faith before the King of Israel and all his soldiers and all the people there. And the big evangelical rally or youth group meeting that you get to speak at or whatever. God's in the truth, in that thin silence, the truth that's in the midst of all that. God sent the wind, he sent the earthquake, he sent the fire, yeah. But the passage makes it clear, like, the point is, it's that thin silence, that quiet voice of truth. So if you're in a really dark place, or somebody is in a dark place, you don't have to come with all the answers and everything. Bring them back to truth. I had one meeting with this one person I had spoken of, and I didn't know where this person was at in life. He hadn't been around. He kind of popped in and out of my life years after year. 4 or 5 years, 6 years would go by, and then all of a sudden I'd see him. We connect for just, 5-10 minutes, but it was always a very pointed sort of like, I need to ask you something, Zach. And this one time he just kind of stumbled out. He's like, hey, can we get together? He had reached out on social media. I was like, yeah. I was like, where do you want to meet? It's like, oh, meet me over by the, this one, fast food joint by this store. And yeah, let's get together there. So I'm there. I'm waiting to meet him. And I thought he was going to drive up or something. And he comes walking out of like this field behind these bushes. And he comes up and he's kind of looking distant, and he comes in, he sits down. It smells like he smoked, 1,000 packs of cigarettes, just, trying to deal with whatever stress he has. And he's very distant. And I remember our conversation, not all the details, but like the general thing was, he was like, telling me about some of the things he'd seen and how the world had changed. And he was really wrestling with the response that people were now giving to, love and the truth and gospel and this and that. And whereas, he's very sensitive to the way people had responded before. And now it was turning very dark and very violent, very hard, and he wasn't seeing God work in a way that he had seen before. And he asked, he's really just searching for what was true. And I remember recognizing that this wasn't just a normal conversation for him. And I just always bring guys like him that know they can trust me, because they know that I know Jesus. Not because I'm something great. That's just God smashed me in my search for truth. And he's all I got. When it all comes down to anything, he's all I got. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And in this conversation, I just brought him back to basic truth. And for him, he considered it, and then he started, I don't know, kind of took that one of those breaths. But in that moment, the enemy wants me to waver or something. I don't waver. I can't waver. For him, for the Lord, I'm not performing some big miracle. And if God gives you a moment, even with one of your spiritual friends or heroes, or, somebody that you really value and appreciate, that you're like, oh my gosh, Lord, this person is like somebody I've like looked up to or looked over at and, needed support from, and they've always been there, and they're crumbling. And they're asking what the whole point is all of a sudden. You don't have to have like a big giant devotional conversation with them. Give them the saltines. Give them the Sprite. Give them the basic bits and pieces of core truth, and love them. And when they doubt, don't waver. Don't waver. Be strong for them. And God will bless that moment in the way in which he means it to be blessed. His word goes out and won't return void. All right. Well, hey, love you. If you're struggling, if you're wrestling, no doubt many people are, call on the Lord. Call on the Lord. Reach out. It's okay if you need a couple nights of sleep to sleep it off. I think God wired our bodies to heal. Sleep is restorative. It helps. But come back. Get to base. Receive that love. And God is there. He's there in the midst of all the chaos. He really is that still small voice. If you would, share this with someone. Hit the like button, whatever, the heart. And just say thank you again to those who are continue to support me in prayer and financially. So why don't we just say this? Until next time, keep walking. God bless. Bye-bye.